Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to our Wisconsin Visitors edition of the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. In just a minute, we'll be joined by Badgers beat writer Jason Galloway from the Wisconsin State Journal in Madison. But before we get to him, my view from Section 17. If you were in the Big House for the first night game against Notre Dame, I think you'll agree, it was special. You could feel the electricity in the crowd as soon as you walked in. The environment was just incredible. The game was an instant classic, too. This Saturday, Wisconsin will be our guest. ESPN Game Day is in town. We'll have a coast-to-coast audience on ABC, and once again, the atmosphere will be electric. We played 6 games so far this year, and it's clear this team is getting better, especially on offense. How much better? We're going to find out this Saturday. We need this win on the big stage. We're due, in my opinion. It won't be easy. Wisconsin will make sure of that. For months now, we've known that beginning with this game, it gets real. We can't worry about who's next on the schedule, though. It's time to take care of business, to step up, and show everyone watching this game we are for real. We're back, and we mean business. I have a very good feeling about this game. I'm not sure why, I just do. Wisconsin entered the season with high expectations, and then they stumbled against BYU early. Now, does that mean they aren't as good as everyone thought? No, it does not. Badger beat writer Jason Galloway from the Wisconsin State Journal says if Wisconsin can come into the Big House and win, they will be back in the national conversation. He joins us next here on the Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Back with us on our visitors segment this year is beat writer Jason Galloway from the Wisconsin State Journal. Once again, great to have you back on the show, Jason.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, a brutal, powerful rushing game with an efficient passing game. Wisconsin is Wisconsin. We all know that here in Ann Arbor, and that's what you're facing when you play them. And other than the BYU game, the Badgers have not disappointed. But what happened in that BYU game, Jason?
Yeah, you know, it was just a rough game all around for Wisconsin. You know, they, I would say both offensively and defensively, they just left a lot to be desired. You know, they couldn't stop the run, which, you know, this defense the past few years you definitely expect them to do, and offensively they just couldn't get anything going consistently. So it's just one of those games where nothing went right for them, and you know, they I feel like the last couple games they've kind of bounced back to win the first two conference games. Now that they still definitely have their issues, especially defensively. But I think they're trying to put that BYU loss behind them, and a win this week against Michigan, although they are underdogs, if they're able to pull this one off, I think that would kind of put them back in the national conversation.
Well, I think most of us in the Big Ten are thinking the BYU loss was just one of those, unexplainable upsets that happen. And what we've seen in the other 4 games is really the kind of team Wisconsin really is. And it starts with that offensive line, Jason. You have 5 300-pound bulldozers. This is another exceptional Badger front, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And that group kind of started the season slow as well. I think that they kind of took a while to get their rhythm going, and they're returning 3 All-Americans and all 5 starters from last season, and so the expectations were extremely high coming into the year. People were touting them as possibly the best offensive line in school history, which is saying a lot here at Wisconsin. And they hadn't quite lived up to that yet, but I think against Nebraska, especially, they played a lot better against Iowa and Nebraska, really, and I think they're starting to get that going. And Jonathan Taylor right now is leading the country in yards per game, and he's on pace for another great season. I think that offensive line is a big part of that.
How about the injuries up front? Is everyone pretty healthy on that offensive line?
Yeah, they've been fortunate enough so far that they haven't really had any injuries up front. John Dietzen, their co-starter at left tackle, has dealt with a little bit of injuries, but that's always kind of the case with him. He's always kind of managing his body, and they have another left tackle in Cole Van Lanen that's playing just as well. They're sort of splitting reps, but they've been able to kind of keep all their guys up front. Their injury issues are really defensively right now, where they have two of their top 3 cornerbacks who are questionable this week. Their best outside linebacker and best pass rusher has been really limited the last few games, and they have their best defensive end, Isaiah Laudermilk, who got injured against Nebraska and is questionable for this game as well. So that's where the real injury issues are, and for this Wisconsin defense this year, they can't really afford that.
Well, back on the offense, those of us in the Big Ten know that Wisconsin has produced some really big-time running backs over the years. But Jonathan Taylor, this kid has a chance to rank right up there with the best that have ever played in Madison, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. I mean, he's a guy he's a legitimate Heisman candidate. He finished 6th last year for the award, and he's on pace for about I believe it's over 2,300 yards right now. If the Badgers were to go on to play 14 games, that's not too far off the pace of what Melvin Gordon had in his record-breaking year in 2014. And it may be a little bit difficult to keep that pace up with. He's got games coming up against teams like Michigan this week, where you don't expect him to go off for 200 yards against this defense. But I think he's having probably an even better season than he did last year as a freshman when he nearly hit the 2,000-yard mark. So he's a really special player. He was last year as a true freshman when he broke onto the scene, and he's only continuing to get better. So I'm excited to see what he can do throughout the rest of his career, and it's going to be, his numbers at the end of his career are going to be really there.
Well, Alex Hornibrook has been efficient this year, at least statistically, but how would you describe his play so far this season, Jason?
I think he has been pretty good, probably better than a lot of fans would agree with. But I think he's been rather efficient. Like you said, you would like their passing game to be a little bit more explosive. They haven't really quite hit a lot of those big plays in the passing game over the last few weeks. So you do want to see them kind of get back to that a little bit. But I think from Hornibrook's perspective, I think the one real blemish on the season was his interception against BYU. It was a third quarter interception that was a really bad throw and allowed BYU to kind of take a 7-point lead in the third quarter and kind of change that game around. So I think that's the one really bad throw I think he'd really like to have back right now. But outside of that, he's played pretty well, and I believe he only has 2 interceptions this year, if I'm not mistaken, and through 5 games, and that was kind of one of his the things he really needed to work on. He had a high turnover rate last year, and despite that BYU pick that was pretty costly, I think that he's kind of cut that down this season.
Overall, and excluding the BYU game, is this offense performing at or near the levels expected?
I still wouldn't say it is. The expectations for this offense were extremely high coming into the year. They were returning 10 starters. Like we already talked about, the offensive line coming back with a 3-year starting quarterback, Heisman candidate at running back, and a wide receiver group that everyone thought was really deep and has a lot of talent on it, even without Quintez Cephas there. So I think that's, people were touting this offense as one of the best this program has seen, and they hadn't really hit their stride yet. I think they've been a little inconsistent. They've had times in games where they look really good and they come through, like against Iowa. They had an 88-yard touchdown drive to really win the game in the final minutes. They also had a 95-yard drive in that game where they looked really good, but there were also times where they kind of sputtered for a long stretches of that game. And I think it was an encouraging performance last week against Nebraska, where they put up 42 points and they play a lot better. But I think everybody looks pretty good against Nebraska right now offensively. So I think maybe we need to take that with a little bit of grain of salt. And I think that this Michigan game is going to be a real good measuring stick for this offense to see how far they've come since the beginning of the year. Because this is, I'm sure, as one of the best defenses they'll see in the country. And I think if they're able to play well this week, that might go a long way toward the offense for its potential.
With us on our visitor segment this week is beat writer Jason Galloway from the Wisconsin State Journal. Jason, before the season started, a lot of football analysts questioned whether the defense would be, near what it was last year for Wisconsin. So far, not quite the defensive team it was last year. You mentioned there are several injuries on the defensive side, but the Badgers have some serious concerns in the secondary, don't they?
They do, yeah. They gave up 407 passing yards against Nebraska, which is the most they've given up to any opponent in more than a decade. So it was tough. It was tough going in that game against the Cornhuskers, and they've like I mentioned, they have some injury issues at cornerback and safety. One of their starting safeties, Scott Nelson, is going to miss the first half of this Michigan game for targeting. In the second half of last game, they have two of their top 3 cornerbacks possibly injured, like I mentioned. They had to throw in a true freshman, Rashad Wildgoose, in his second game ever, to really play an every down role against Nebraska for the large majority of that game after Deron Harrell went out with a head injury. So it's it was just, this is one of those years where they really couldn't afford defensively to hit some injury issues, and they really have. And I think the pass rush kind of plays a pretty big part in their pass defense as well. The pass rush has not been what the past few years. They only have 5 sacks in 5 games this year, and they had 42 last year. They averaged 3 a game, and a lot of their pass rushers moved to the NFL, and they haven't really been able to replace that. And with being ankle injured, I think it's kind of magnified that a little bit. So I think it's just one of those years where some of the new starters they plugged in haven't quite been up to the pace yet, and then of course some of the injuries have kind of compounded that. And so I think they're trying to find their footing right now. The last 3 games, BYU, Iowa, and Nebraska, they really haven't played well defensively, and so it's going to be a challenge coming into this Michigan game to try to turn it around.
This Saturday night, Jason, what it boils down to, in my opinion, is Wisconsin's front and running game against Michigan's front 7. Whoever wins that battle wins the game, and I really think it's that simple, don't you?
I definitely think that's probably the matchup you look at as definitely being one of the most important. I think I think when you look at with this Wisconsin offensive line, like I mentioned, they've started to play a little bit better, but they haven't been quite at the level that you would expect from a group of so much talent. So I think it's going to be, Wisconsin can't get their running game going. That's really going to hamper their offense to put up a decent amount of points. And I think when you look at Wisconsin's defense, I don't think they have. I think the offense is going to have to put up some points. I don't think it's going to be like 2016 where it's a 14-7 game and at the Big House and the defense, Wisconsin's defense, holds Michigan down to a low point total. I think that Wisconsin's offense is going to have to find a way to score points, and it starts up front with that offensive line being able to kind of help get their running game going.
Well, from a game planning perspective, these teams similar in many ways, Jason. They both want to pound the rock, use the passing game to keep the defense honest. So I think from a Michigan perspective, Shea Patterson is going to be a real key here. He's a quarterback, that type of quarterback we did not have in Madison last year. He should have some success throwing the ball, and his ability to move around fine receivers should really test this secondary in a big way, Jason. As we mentioned, Badgers have issues back there, so to me that would be the second key in this game.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, Michigan didn't really have a quarterback like this last year. I think that really changes things for their offense, and especially with this Wisconsin defense kind of struggling right now. I think there's going to be a lot of ways that Shea Patterson and Michigan can kind of hurt this defense. So, I think it's going to be. I think a lot. We've talked about the secondary, but I think a lot's also going to fall on the defensive line for Wisconsin. That's a group that has some retro freshmen playing a lot of snaps, and especially if Isaiah Laudermilk is out, their best defensive end. If he can't play, you're probably going to start two retro freshmen at defensive end, one of whom has only been on defense for a few months now after switching from offensive line, and that's Caden Lyles. And so it's an inexperienced front, and I think that they're going to have to be able to kind of contain Michigan's running game so that that Michigan can't set up that play action game and hurt them in the passing game, because I think that's been one of the issues. Another reason why Wisconsin hasn't been able to stop the passes. I think we saw it mostly against Iowa this year. Iowa ran the ball really well against Wisconsin and got themselves in a lot of third and short situations. That's when they could use their play action game and really hurt Wisconsin that way. So I think that Michigan sort of could take a similar approach there. And I think the defensive line for Wisconsin has to step up and be able to hold their own at the line of scrimmage and kind of contain Michigan's running game from the start.
Well, I've been telling my listeners the last few weeks, I'm not sure if Michigan is just a good football team or one that is ready to turn the corner, maybe challenge in the Big Ten East. I think Badgers fans in some ways feel that same way over in the West. This really is a true barometer game for both of these teams, isn't it, Jason?
Yeah, I definitely think it is. I think for Wisconsin, I think people still view them as the favorite in the West after winning that Iowa game in particular, and they should still win the West. They have the talent to do so, but that doesn't mean that. I think people are really waiting to see if this team actually can challenge some of the top teams in the East, and if they have any chance, to actually win the Big Ten championship game once they get there. So I think this Michigan game will say a lot about where this team is right now. If they can go in there and give Michigan a really good game and have a chance to win, then I think it might, and they played better than they had the last few weeks. I think it could definitely ease some concerns of the fans here in Madison.
Well, ESPN Game Day is going to be there for the first time in a few years, and right now the weather forecast is for temps in the 40s and the 50s, so setting up to be a perfect football atmosphere. There are times, these kind of games just don't live up to their hype. It happens all too often, it seems. But this one, for some reason, I just have a feeling this one might live up to its hype. It really does have the makings of a classic confrontation, doesn't it?
Yeah, we'll see. I think it's definitely one of those games that, like we mentioned, I think both these teams, you still not really sure exactly what they are yet, and I think it's one of those games that it could be a real classic. We'll wait and see, but I think that one of these teams is going to come away from this feeling pretty good about what direction they're heading, and the other one might be looking for some answers.
A huge game for both teams, 7:30 p.m. Saturday night in the Big House. Our guest today on our visitor segment has been beat writer Jason Galloway from the Wisconsin State Journal. Great to have you back again this year, Jason, and we look forward to a visit next year.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, Jay Harbaugh tweeted on Wednesday that Chris Evans will play on Saturday. Up to this point, we have no updates on Rashawn Gary, Michael Dwumfor, or Carlo Kemp. Here are some game day facts. We lead this series with 50 wins against 15 losses and 1 tie. The first meeting was on October 15, 1892 in Madison, a 10-6 Michigan win. Last year in Madison on November 18th, we lost 24-10. Paul Chryst is 34-7 in his 4th year as head man at Wisconsin. His overall record in 7 years as a head coach is 53-26. Last year they were 13-1 overall and finished first in the Big Ten West. Their only loss was to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. They finished the season ranked number 7. They returned 9 starters on offense, but only 4 on defense. The weather for Saturday's game should be perfect for football. Temps in the 40s at game time with no chance of rain. As always, check the weather on Friday. Our free show app is available from the iTunes and Google Play stores. You can also hear us on Stitcher, iHeart, TuneIn, Spotify, and Wolverine Sports Radio, so check out one of the apps. That will do it for another week. It should be a great environment and a lot of fun Saturday night in the Big House. By late Saturday night, we'll know if we're back. It's been too long, 10 long years, spare 1 season, of being a non-factor when the leaves turn colors here in Michigan. It's time. Think victory, beat Wisconsin. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine weekend, everyone. We'll see you back here next week as we get ready for a trip to East Lansing and a noon kickoff against the Spartans. So until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!